I didn't even know the old man had a will. When he passed, the whole family assumed there was nothing to sort out. My brother had been living in the house for 27 years by then, ever since Mom passed. He stayed behind while I went off to college, then the city, then back again when the city chewed me up and spit me out. He took care of Dad in the later years. No, to be honest, Dad didn't need much taken care of. He was the kind of man who'd rather die on his own feet and live in a wheelchair. And that's exactly what he did. Died upright, right at the edge of the front porch, staring at the same fields he'd plowed for 50 years. They found him with a coffee mug still in hand. We buried him without much ceremony. He was never big on churches or pastors or any of that. Just a quiet man with calloused hands and boots that never seemed to wear out. I stood beside my brother during the service, both of us silent, like two barn doors swinging in the wind, creaking, but never quite touching. I don't remember crying. What I do remember was the lawyer, a young man who didn't look like he'd ever had dirt under his nails, pulling me aside after the funeral. He had a manila envelope tucked into his satchel. "There's a will," he said. I looked at him like he'd just handed me a brick of gold and told me to chew it. "Since when?" I asked. "Dated about 6 years ago. Your father filed it through our office. You're named in it." That's how it started. 2 weeks later, we met in the back room of a dusty legal office in town. Just me, my brother Thomas, and the lawyer. No one else. No cousins, no aunts. Just blood and paper. Thomas looked like he'd rather be digging a ditch in July than sitting in that office. He wore the same denim jacket he always did, the one with the frayed collar and the stitched patch that said Tom like he needed reminding. The lawyer cleared his throat. I sat stiff in the plastic chair, arms crossed. He read the document aloud. Formal, dry, impersonal. And then came the sentence that split us open. "To my son Daniel, I leave the land, north to south, fence post to fence post. I trust he'll know what to do with it." That was me. Not Thomas. Me. There was a long silence after that, the kind that stretches too long to be polite, but too short to call it over. Thomas didn't say a word. He just stood up, nodded once, and walked out the door. I stayed behind, still seated, my stomach somewhere near my boots. "Are you sure?" I asked. The lawyer nodded. "It's notarized, witnessed, properly filed." Back then, I didn't know what to feel. I hadn't even planned on staying in town. My return had only been temporary, just to bury Dad, help settle whatever little business he had left, and then get back to my half job in the city, designing logos for people who didn't know what they wanted and wouldn't pay what I needed. But now, the land, Dad's land. I didn't grow up coveting it. We both worked it as kids, sure. Pulled weeds, drove fence posts, broke ice in the troughs in January freezes. But I never saw it as mine. That land was always Dad's. And later, it became Thomas's by proximity, by habit, by dust settled on his boots. And yet there it was, in legal ink. Dad wanted me to have it. I walked home that evening down Main Street, eyes blurry, not from tears, but from the heat of confusion. Folks nodded at me as I passed, unaware that something had quietly ruptured under my skin. I didn't go straight to the house. I went out to the property. Just me and the wind and the damn fence line. I stood near the old oak, the one we used to climb as boys. I traced the edges of the fields with my eyes. The corn rows were stunted. The barn leaned a little more than last year. It didn't look like a gift. It looked like a burden. Thomas didn't talk to me for 6 weeks. And when he did, it wasn't about the will. He came by the house, middle of the afternoon, knocked once like he owned the place, which for 27 years he might as well have. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. "Listen," he said, standing just inside the doorway. "I don't want no trouble, but that land, that's where I live. I built my life on it, and I ain't moving." I nodded. He stared. "That paper don't mean a damn thing to me," he added. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I just said, "I know." And he left. Folks started whispering soon after. Small-town gossip moves like smoke, slippery and hard to contain, but always smelling like something's burning. Some said I was going to evict him. Some said I was selling the land. Some said I forged the will. I didn't say anything. I went quiet, which, as it turns out, made things worse. I thought about burning the damn will. More than once, I pulled it out from the drawer and stared at it, the legal wording all sharp angles and cold ink. I imagined setting it on fire, letting it all go, letting Thomas keep everything and disappearing back into the blur of the city. But I didn't. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of some twisted sense of obligation, or maybe, just maybe, because a small part of me thought, Dad left this for a reason, and that reason might still be worth something. You know, some folks think a signature on paper can settle everything. But when you got 30 years of footsteps on the same dirt, well, ink don't erase footprints. If you've made it this far into the story, thank you. Maybe it reminds you of something, or someone. Maybe not. But I hope you'll stay a while longer. Because the truth of it is, this story didn't begin with a will. It began with 2 boys, 1 river, and a summer that felt like it'd never end. Let's go back. We used to share a room. 2 twin beds, 1 window, and a ceiling fan that clicked like it was always on the verge of falling. We fought over everything. Blankets, radio stations, who had to get the milk from the barn, but it never lasted. Not back then. Back then it always ended the same way. One of us would toss a pillow, the other would toss it back, and pretty soon we were both laughing so hard the floorboards creaked. Thomas was older by 4 years. That meant he got blamed first, hit harder, and sent to bed earlier when things went south. But he never resented me for it. Not back then. He used to call me Little D. Not Daniel, just Little D. I hated it at first, but he said it like it was something important, like I was part of something. So I kept it. We spent most summers barefoot. Back then the grass was taller and the sun felt warmer. Or maybe I just had fewer reasons to hide from it. We'd race to the riverbank every morning once chores were done, sticks in hand like we were off to some grand war. And in our minds we were. The field was our battlefield, The hay bales, our forts, the chickens, unwilling as they were, became dragons to slay. I remember the mud, how it stuck to our knees like a badge of honor. Mom would holler at us from the porch, waving a dish towel like it was a white flag of surrender. "Lord have mercy, you boys are gonna bring the whole creek inside." And Thomas would grin that crooked grin, the one he still had even as a grown man, and shout back, "Just bringing home the fish, Mama." We never caught fish, not really, but we caught something else. Time, memory, something no hook could hold, but stayed with you longer than a scar. He was always the brave one. I remember when I broke my arm falling out of that tree behind the barn. I was 8. Thomas climbed halfway up before I even stopped crying. He told me not to look at the bones sticking out. "Just look at me," he said. "You're fine. You're just bent, not broken." He carried me back over a mile in the heat, never complained. When Dad found out what happened, he didn't say much, just looked at Thomas and said, "Did you let him climb that damn tree?" Thomas didn't flinch. "No, sir." That was a lie. Of course he let me. He'd even boosted me up. But he took the heat. That was Thomas, back then. He had this idea that we'd build a fort by the creek, a real one, with wood and nails and a roof that didn't leak. We spent a whole week dragging junk from the shed, old planks and bent nails, busted screen doors and empty barrels. It looked like hell, but to us, it was a palace. We called it Fort Brother. We etched it into the wood with a pocket knife Dad didn't know we'd borrowed. Fort Brother, in sloppy, jagged letters. That fort lasted 2 summers before the rain took it. But those letters, they stayed. Looking back now, I can't tell you the moment it changed. It's not like there was one big fight, one explosion. It was slower than that. Like rot, like rust. A little each day. So slow you don't notice until you lean on the rail and it snaps beneath you. Maybe it was when he got his driver's license. Suddenly he had freedom. Girls, nights out, smokes he didn't think I knew about. He'd leave me behind more and more. Said I was too young. Said I wouldn't understand. He was probably right. I stayed home, read books, drew pictures, wrote stories in the margins of my schoolwork. I became weird. That's what they said at school. Teachers liked me. The other boys didn't. Thomas didn't say much, but he stopped sticking up for me. Stopped inviting me places. Stopped calling me Little D. By the time I turned 16, we were more like roommates than brothers. He had a job at the feed store and came home smelling like dust and sweat. I spent my afternoons in the library or out walking the field line with a sketch pad. We didn't fight, not exactly, but the silences got longer. He stopped looking in my direction when I spoke, and I started writing letters I never sent, to girls I liked, to colleges I couldn't afford, to Thomas. None of them ever made it past the bottom drawer of my desk. I left for college the summer after Mom died. Thomas stayed. He said someone needed to take care of Dad. He was right, and I was too tired to argue. It wasn't a tearful goodbye. No promises of calls or visits. Just a handshake. Firm. Cold. Like business partners dissolving a deal. I came back less and less. At first it was money. Then time. Then shame. Shame that I couldn't help. Shame that I didn't want to. Shame that the boy who once carried me a mile through the heat now felt like a stranger I wouldn't recognize in a grocery store. We never fought over the land back then. We never thought about who would get what. The house, the fields, the barn. It was just there. Like the sky. Like time. Like the sound of your brother's boots on the porch at night. Something you took for granted. I remember one visit, maybe 10 years back. I'd come down for Thanksgiving. First time in 5 years. Dad was thinner, grayer, but still sharp. Thomas was harder. Not angry, just carved from something older than he used to be. We barely spoke until I mentioned the land. Not to start a fight, just curious. I said something like, "You think Dad's gonna pass it down to both of us?" Thomas didn't even look up from his plate. He said, "Ain't mine to give." And then he went back to chewing. I thought about that night for a long time after. How final it sounded. How distant. Like the sound of a train you're not sure is coming or going. And then came the will. 6 years later. Signed, stamped, delivered. To me. And here we are. Funny thing about brothers, you don't always notice when the talking stops. You just wake up one day and realize you've been strangers for years. But silence ain't empty. It's full of things never said. Regret, pride, maybe even love. In the next part of this story, I'll tell you how the distance between us didn't grow overnight. It crept in like weeds in a garden we forgot to tend. And by the time we looked back, neither of us could see the path we used to walk side by side.
We didn't fall out all at once. There wasn't some big shouting match, or fists thrown, or doors slammed so hard the hinges cracked. Nothing like that. It was more like one day the phone stopped ringing, and then the next, I stopped expecting it to. Thomas and I used to call once a week, then once a month. Then it became Christmas, maybe. If it wasn't for Dad, I don't think we'd have talked at all. He was the glue, old and quiet as he'd gotten, but still sharp enough to know when two sons were drifting too far apart. "Thomas asked about you," he'd say, even when I knew damn well Thomas didn't. And I'd lie right back. Tell him I said hey, but I never said it myself. You ever walk into your childhood home and feel like a guest? That's what it became for me. I'd drive the 5 hours down every other year or so, bring store-bought pie, a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, and leave with a knot in my stomach. Thomas would barely say 2 words. Not angry, not even cold, just blank. Like I was someone who used to matter. Like we were 2 men renting history from the same building, paying different kinds of rent. At first, I tried. I asked about the harvest. He said, dry. I asked about the town. He said, same. I asked about him. He didn't answer, so I stopped asking. I remember sitting at that old kitchen table, scratched, nicked, still with a drawer that stuck, and watching Thomas drink his coffee in silence. I knew that silence. It was the same kind I'd use with women when I didn't want to explain why I left, the kind that dared someone to fill it. So I didn't. I let it sit there between us, like the unspoken things we'd never say. You know what people forget about distance? It needs maintenance. You don't just drift apart. You keep choosing not to reach across. And that's what we did. Every year, every visit, every holiday. 1,000 chances to say, "What happened?" 1,000 chances to say, "I miss you." We never took any of them. I started to avoid going altogether. Told myself I was busy, too many deadlines, too expensive. Truth is, I didn't know how to be around him anymore. Didn't know if he was angry or just tired of pretending. Didn't know if I was. One year, I got word from a neighbor that Thomas had been in a car accident. Nothing serious, just a fender bender. But he didn't call me. Didn't even tell Dad. I found out through a Christmas card from Mrs. Reed down the road. She'd scribbled a note next to the candy cane stickers. "Hope your brother's okay after that crash. Heard he's limping a bit." That's how I found out, from a damn card. I called, straight to voicemail. I left a message, something stiff and awkward, like a stranger offering condolences. He never called back. That was the moment, I think. The one where I realized we were no longer brothers. Not really. We were men with the same last name, same history, different futures. When Dad got sick, it should have brought us together. It didn't. Thomas handled most of it. I sent money. It felt like the right thing to do, the only thing I could do. I told myself that enough times, it almost felt true. When Dad passed, I came back for the funeral. It rained. Of course it did. Thomas and I stood on either side of the casket, umbrellas tilted opposite directions, like we were trying to avoid each other's grief. He didn't look at me once. Not during the service, not during the burial, not even when the preacher said, "You boys were his pride." I wanted to believe that still meant something, but the look in Thomas's eyes said otherwise. We sat in the truck afterwards, me in the passenger seat, him with his hands clenched on the wheel like he was still driving through something. After a long silence, I asked, "You gonna be all right?" He stared straight ahead. "I always am." Then he started the engine. And just like that, the moment passed. Another silence maintained. You'd think death would heal something, that standing over the grave of the man who raised you would make you reach out. But it doesn't. Sometimes it just makes the silence louder. Over the next couple years, we didn't speak at all. No cards, no calls. Birthdays came and went. Holidays, too. And the land, well, it just sat there. Quiet. Waiting. Like it knew the two boys who used to run across it barefoot would never walk it together again. Sometimes it's not the words we say that break something. It's the ones we don't. And by the time I realized what was slipping through our hands, Thomas and I had already let go. But the thing about family is, even when the bond thins, it never disappears. It just hides until something or someone brings it crashing back into the light. In the next part, I'll tell you about the moment it all cracked. The first blow. The truth I wish I'd never heard.
and the one he never meant for me to find out. I wish I could tell you it was some dramatic moment, that we stood toe-to-toe in the middle of the field, yelling, fists clenched, years of silence finally cracking like old wood in winter. But that's not how it happened. The first real blow wasn't loud. It was a letter. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, just my name, written in that scratchy, slanted script I hadn't seen in years. At first, I thought it was from Thomas, and for a split second, my chest did this strange thing. Hope, maybe. Like a dog hearing the sound of an old truck pulling up the drive, tail wagging before the door even opens. But it wasn't from him. Not exactly. It was from her. Her name was Emily, and 25 years ago, she'd almost become my sister-in-law, Thomas's first love, the one everyone in town said he'd marry, the one Mama made peach cobbler for every Sunday she came over, the one Dad shook hands with real firm, like sealing something bigger than just polite hellos. They'd been together for years, high school sweethearts. She had that soft kind of presence, like light through curtains in the morning. I always thought they'd make it. But one day, she was gone. No explanation, no big scene. Just gone. And Thomas never talked about it. Not once. That letter, it started with, "I'm sorry I didn't write sooner. I thought it wasn't my place, but after hearing about your father's passing, I felt like you deserved to know." She went on, paragraph after paragraph, words folding into words like a blanket too heavy to lift. And somewhere in the middle of it, between lines filled with guilt and shaky honesty, I found the sentence that landed the first real punch. I left because Thomas told me to. I read that 3 times. It didn't make sense. He told her to go? Why? He loved her. He was going to propose. I remember the ring. I helped him pick it out. I remember the night before, he was so nervous he didn't sleep. He kept pacing the living room, mumbling lines he wanted to say. So what the hell happened? Emily's letter said this. He told me there was something in him, something broken that he couldn't explain, that it wouldn't be fair to me. He said if I stayed, I'd hate him for it one day. And I believed him. But I also think he was hiding something from you, something about the land. The land. Always the land. I called her. I don't know what I expected. Maybe denial, maybe more confusion. But what I got was silence. And then, I didn't think he'd never tell you. That was the moment I knew something cracked. Not just between Thomas and me, but between who I thought we were and who we actually were. Because see, Thomas was the honest one, the loyal one, the steady rock when I was off chasing something. But what if that wasn't true? What if he'd been hiding, protecting himself, or worse, protecting me from something he thought I couldn't handle? I let the phone drop onto the couch and just sat there, staring at the coffee table, at the old photo of us from 1987, Thomas in overalls, me in a ridiculous band tee, both of us grinning with Dad's arms over our shoulders. What had he hidden? What was so bad it made him push away the woman he loved? And why? Why didn't he ever tell me? I didn't sleep that night. I pored over old journals, letters, even tax documents from the farm. I looked for patterns, numbers, deals, anything. And then I found it. An old ledger, tucked in the back of a drawer I hadn't opened in years. It listed something strange, a buyout offer from over 20 years ago, from a company I didn't recognize. But the number? It was massive, life-changing, enough to sell the land, start fresh. But Thomas never mentioned it, not once. He turned it down, that much was clear. But why? Why wouldn't he at least tell me? It had both of our names on it. And then I saw the note scrawled in the margin, in Dad's handwriting. Tom says no, said he don't trust them, said he'll carry it all himself if he has to. That was the blow. Not the money, not the land, not even the lost love. It was the choice. He'd decided for both of us. He'd carried the burden alone and never gave me the chance to help or say no. I didn't feel grateful. I felt betrayed, like he thought I was too weak, too selfish, too far gone to be trusted with something that mattered. And maybe I had been, but I still should have been given the damn choice. I didn't call him. I didn't write. I just let the weight of it settle in my chest like an old injury flaring up before a storm. That was the first real blow. And it didn't break my bones, but it sure as hell fractured something deeper.
You'd think the first blow would bring confrontation, but no. Sometimes the truth doesn't spark a fire. It just turns the air cold. And that cold, it stayed with me for years. In the next chapter, I'll tell you about the years I disappeared. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. And how the man I once called brother became someone I couldn't even picture anymore. There's a certain kind of forgetting that doesn't happen all at once. It's not like waking up one day and not recognizing your own reflection. It's slower, like water wearing down stone, like mail that stops coming, like a name you used to hear every day, and then suddenly you don't. For the next 5 years, I barely spoke Thomas's name. Not out loud, not even in my head. It wasn't that I was angry. Not entirely. It was something duller, worse maybe. It was that tired kind of numb where you stop trying, stop hoping. You tell yourself, that's just how things are now. And then you build a life around the absence. I moved to Tucson, got a job doing inventory for a chain of farm supply stores. It was honest work, predictable. Nobody knew me there, nobody knew Thomas, nobody asked, and I didn't offer. Some nights I'd stare out my apartment window at the desert stretching out like a cracked plate, and I'd imagine what the farm looked like, what Thomas was doing, if the dog we had was still around. But I never picked up the phone, not once. People say forgiveness is for the forgiver. But what if you don't even know what you're forgiving? What if the wound's so old and quiet, you don't even remember what cut you? I dated someone for a while, a woman named Darlene. She was kind, made strong coffee, laughed from her gut, but she wanted things I couldn't give, like presence, like vulnerability. She'd ask about my family, and I'd brush it off. One night she said, "You always talk like you're still trying to disappear from someone." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. And that was the beginning of the end. I wasn't angry at Thomas anymore. I wasn't anything.
And that scared me, because when you're nothing about someone, it means the bonds rotted through. No pulse, no ache, just dust where the hurt used to be. Then came the voicemail. I still remember the time, 7:42 p.m., a Thursday. I was heating up leftover chili, phone buzzed, and for some reason, I answered. But it wasn't Thomas. It was a neighbor. Said my brother had been taken to the hospital. Something about fainting while working the field. Said it might be his heart. Said I might want to come. I didn't. Not right away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, spoon in hand, and didn't take a single bite. I just sat there, chili going cold, my body stuck in a limbo of who I used to be and who I said I'd become. The next day, I called the hospital. He was stable. I didn't leave a message, just hung up. And then I called again. This time, I asked for his room. They patched me through. He answered, "Yeah?" That was all he said. No name, no recognition, just one syllable. I panicked, hung up, and then sat there, ashamed like a damn child. A week passed, then a month, then another voicemail. Not from Thomas, from the neighbor again. Said he was recovering, said he wasn't himself lately, said the land was overgrown, said maybe someone needed to come back. I booked a ticket. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't even know what I'd say when I arrived. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep erasing a man who shared my blood just because he broke something I couldn't name. When I got off the bus back in Drybone, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the awkward kind. The kind that feels like an unfinished conversation, like people stopped talking when you walked in. The house looked smaller, the trees thinner. Even the sun felt different. And there, on the porch, was Thomas, sitting like he never left. Same hat, same boots, but something in the way he held himself was different. Smaller, worn, like the wind had been carving him down piece by piece. I didn't say anything, just stood there with my bag. He looked at me, didn't smile, didn't frown, just nodded and said, "You hungry?" We didn't talk about the letter, or Emily, or the buyout. We didn't talk about the years. We just ate, silently. Two ghosts pretending to be men. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the bed in my old room. Dust on the windowsill. Books I hadn't touched since high school. And for the first time in years, I whispered his name. Thomas. It felt strange, like calling to a stranger through a wall. That's how the years passed, one awkward step at a time. Some days we spoke, most we didn't. We worked the land, fixed what needed fixing, replaced what couldn't be saved. I didn't forgive him, but I showed up, and maybe that was enough. For then. Sometimes you come home thinking you're the one doing the saving, but you find out you're just in time to say goodbye.
In the next part, I'll tell you about the day Thomas changed. The look in his eyes, the way the land didn't move the same anymore, and how I realized some endings don't come with storms, just a long, quiet dusk.
He started forgetting things. At first, it was small stuff. The names of the dogs we used to have, where we kept the spare keys, the year Mom passed. I'd correct him gently. He'd laugh it off, say something like, "Guess the old ticker's leaking memory these days." But I saw it in his eyes. It wasn't just age. It was something deeper. Like his mind was a barn with doors slowly creaking open to the wind. Then came the day he couldn't remember my name. He looked me dead in the eye while we were fixing the back fence, and he said, "Say, what was your name again, bud?" I smiled, said, "Don't worry about it." He nodded, as if that was good enough, and I swallowed something bitter and old that had nothing to do with the desert dust. There's a kind of ache that comes from watching someone you love become someone you don't recognize. Worse yet, someone who doesn't recognize you. Is grief in slow motion, like watching a sunset that never ends. We never got a diagnosis. He didn't want doctors, didn't trust them. Said all they do is poke around and give you bad news. I respected that, until I didn't. One day I called a clinic in town without telling him. Made an appointment, just in case. He missed it. Not because he refused to go, but because he forgot we ever made it. I sat in that waiting room by myself, hands clenched, heart pounding like I was the one being seen. And when I got home, he was watering the same patch of dirt he'd already soaked twice. Didn't even notice I'd left. I started writing things down. Not for him, for me. Because if I didn't, I was afraid I'd forget what he used to be. How he'd argue with the radio about football. How he'd whistle Johnny Cash without realizing. How he once told me the worst kind of loneliness is being in a room full of people and still feeling invisible. Now he was the invisible one, and I was the one watching. The land didn't help. What once was life-giving started to feel like weight, like obligation. Thomas would wander into the fields and not come back for hours. I'd find him under the cottonwood tree, talking to it like it was someone else. Maybe it was. Maybe he saw something I didn't, or someone. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I got quieter. Stopped calling friends. Stopped driving into town. I began living inside the house of his fading. Every day was another brick in the wall around me. Neighbors started checking in. They brought pies, asked if we needed anything. I said no, because what could they give? A pie doesn't fix a fractured mind. A casserole doesn't bring back a name. One night, I found him sitting on the porch with both shoes on the wrong feet. He looked up and said, "Mom says dinner's almost ready." My throat tightened. I said, "She's not here anymore, Thomas." He blinked, looked at me like I'd just told him the sun died. I knew it was time Time to talk about help. Maybe assisted care. Maybe someone coming by. But how do you tell a man who taught you how to ride a horse, how to throw a punch, how to change oil and build a fence, that he needs someone to watch him use a fork? I tried one morning over eggs. He looked at me, silent, then calmly said, "You planning to ship me off like an old mule?" I didn't answer. He nodded. I thought so. We didn't talk for 2 days after that. But something shifted. Because a week later, he came into the kitchen holding a flyer. It was for a local part-time caregiver. He said, "Maybe she can help with the weeding. Place getting wild." I knew what he meant. And I wanted to hug him. But I didn't. I just said, "Yeah, might be good." Her name was Irene. She was gentle, spoke in short sentences, didn't ask too many questions. Thomas liked her, even called her kiddo sometimes, like he used to with me. She didn't fix him, but she made him laugh. And that, in those days, felt like a miracle. We made it through that summer. Barely. There were moments I didn't think we would. But every morning, I'd hear the creak of the porch and know Thomas had made it to another day. I kept a journal. Every entry began with the same line. Today, Thomas remembered me. Or, today, he didn't. Some days I wanted to rip the pages out. Others, I clung to him like gospel. Then came the night he didn't come in. I found him asleep under the stars, curled up on the dirt, his boots off, his hat over his face. When I shook him awake, he opened his eyes slowly and whispered, "I was just talking to her." I asked, "To who?" He said, "Emily." And for the first time in years, I believed him. You think you know what distance looks like until you see it in someone's eyes. In the next part, I'll tell you about the morning I saw him look at me, not as a brother, not even as a man he remembered, but as a stranger with a memory he couldn't touch. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I was chopping wood out back, and the wind smelled like rain, but the sky was stubbornly blue. Thomas came out with 2 mugs of coffee, like he always did when we worked together. He handed me one, sat down on the porch swing, and said, "Do you live around here?" I laughed. I thought he was joking. But when I looked up, he wasn't smiling. There was this long silence, not awkward, not heavy, just hollow, like someone had emptied the room of oxygen. I didn't answer right away. "What do you say to that?" I said, "I used to," and took a sip of coffee, like it was just a normal morning. He nodded. "Figured. You look familiar, but I just can't place you." I wanted to scream, wanted to shake him and say, "It's me, damn it! I'm your brother! I've been here the whole time!" But I didn't, because that wasn't who he was anymore, and maybe it wasn't who I was anymore either. We sat there for a good hour. He talked about the land like it was his only companion, told me stories I already knew. then asked me again, "So, what do you do for a living?" I lied, said I was a mechanic passing through. He said, "Good folks, mechanics. My brother was one." I said, "Is that right?" And he smiled. The rest of the day went like that. He called me friend, told me about himself like I was a stranger on a train. Said he used to have a little brother who never left, always stuck around even when things got hard. I wanted to cry, but instead I just nodded and said, "Sounds like a good man." Later that night I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old clock on the wall. It had stopped ticking 2 years ago. Thomas never noticed. That night I didn't wind it either. What was the point? Time had already betrayed us. I opened my journal, wrote, "Today, Thomas introduced himself to me." Then, after a long pause, he didn't recognize the hands that helped build this home. The next morning, things were different. He remembered my name, said, "Morning, kid, you sleep all right?" I nodded, but I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was yesterday a glitch? A passing cloud? Or was it a sign the storm was coming? Irene noticed too. She said, "Some days he's clearer than a church bell. Others, he's fog." I asked if that would get worse. She didn't answer. Just placed her hand on my shoulder and squeezed once, hard enough to say everything. We started labeling things around the house. Drawers, cabinets, photos. I put little notes on everything. A sticky note on the mirror that said, "You are Thomas," and one on the fridge that said, "Your brother is here." One afternoon, I found him sitting in the truck, staring at the steering wheel. He said he was trying to remember how to start it. He hadn't driven in months. I told him, "It's okay. We'll go for a drive together." He nodded, smiling like a child who just got invited on an adventure. We drove down the long road behind the property. He pointed at trees like they were new, whistled songs he'd forgotten the names of, talked about our dad like he'd just passed last week. It was beautiful and unbearable. I stopped the truck near the edge of the land. There's an old wooden bench there, half buried in weeds. We used to sit there as boys watching sunsets and talking about places we'd never go. He looked at it and said, "That's where I first kissed Emily." I froze. Emily wasn't his wife. She was mine. I didn't say anything. Didn't correct him. Maybe he did kiss her there. Maybe memory has its own compass. And maybe the past is softer when blurred. When we got home, he was tired. I helped him to bed. As I tucked the blanket over him, he grabbed my wrist and said, "Thanks for coming today." I smiled, said, "Anytime, big brother." He closed his eyes. That was the last good day. He stopped reaching for my hand on a Wednesday. I remember the soup on the stove. It burned. because I forgot it, because I was too busy watching him sleep. Thomas had always been a restless sleeper. Even when we were kids, he'd talk in his sleep, kick the covers off, mumble names. But that night, he was still, too still. I sat by the bed with a paperback I wasn't reading. The words swam around on the page, never settling, like dust in the sunlight. Every so often, his lips would twitch, like he was trying to say something, but never quite found the breath. I reached for his hand. It didn't respond. That hand had held a hammer beside mine, had pulled me up from muddy rivers, had thrown baseballs until sunset. That hand had been my anchor, and now it just rested. The next morning, he didn't know who I was, didn't know who he was either. Irene came by. She brought tea, and that look in her eyes, the one that said, "It's time." We moved the bed into the front room, the one with the window facing east. He always liked sunrises. The next week was slow. He didn't eat, didn't speak. Sometimes he'd open his eyes, and there'd be this flicker, like the engine almost catching. But it never did. I talked to him anyway. Told him stories, jokes, prayers, read him the newspaper, even the classifieds. Laughed like we were in on a joke nobody else got, because I wanted him to hear joy, even if he couldn't hold it anymore. One afternoon, while I was reading about a farm auction 2 towns over, he blinked twice, then turned his head, just a little. I said, "Hey, you in there?" He blinked again, then whispered something. I leaned in close. He said, "Sunset. We never made it to Montana." I wanted to say, "We never needed to," but I just nodded and said, "Maybe next time." That night, he reached for my hand. Not strong, not sure, just muscle memory. I let him find it, and I held it like it was a lifeline. In the days that followed, he drifted more. Sometimes he smiled at shadows. Other times he wept at nothing. Once he asked where our dog was, the one who died in 1996. I told him she was waiting for him. The last day came without warning. The sky was clear, no birds. The room smelled like lemon oil and old wood. I was humming something, don't even know what. Just sound. A filler for silence. His hand moved once more, just barely, then stopped. I waited, counted the seconds, called Irene. She said, "He's gone, honey." But I didn't believe her. I kept holding his hand, just in case. I sat there all night, and in the morning, when the light hit his face, I saw it. Peace. Like the war inside him had finally ended. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I cleaned the room, made the bed, folded his shirts one last time. Because grief, for me, was practical first. Later, I stood on the porch, looked out over the land. It didn't feel empty. It felt held. Irene hugged me tight. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Because we both knew he was everywhere now. Not just in photos, not just in the tool shed, but in the dust and the trees and the wind that never stopped whispering his name. That night, I wrote in my journal, "He let go, so I didn't have to." I'll talk about the silence that followed, and how I learned to live with it, or at least, how I learned not to run from it. They say grief comes in waves, that it knocks you over when you least expect it. But for me, it was fog, a thick, heavy fog that never fully lifted, just sat there, settled into my bones, into the wood of the floors, into the rhythm of my steps. The house felt too big, too quiet. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like his voice. Every shadow held the shape of his shoulders. Every cupboard I opened seemed to whisper, he was just here. I didn't throw anything away, not right away. His boots stayed by the door, his toothbrush in the holder, his jacket on the hook by the stairs. I told myself it was because I wasn't ready, but the truth is, it made him feel less gone. I kept making 2 cups of coffee every morning, out of habit, and I'd sit on the porch, holding both mugs, like maybe he was just running late. Like maybe this was the morning he'd come walking up the road again, swinging his arms, squinting at the light, smiling like he used to. Irene came by more often. Sometimes she'd cook. Sometimes she'd just sit with me. Other times, we wouldn't say a word. Just let the silence do the talking. She told me once, "You don't get over people. You grow around the hole they leave." I didn't respond, but that line stuck to me. Still does. The first real breakdown came 3 weeks later. I was going through some of Thomas's tools, just trying to organize the shed, keep busy. I picked up his hammer, the handle still warm from the sun, still worn where his grip had smoothed the wood, and I broke, dropped to my knees. Didn't cry like in the movies, no wailing, just leaked. Tears fell like the body had decided it was tired of pretending. I stayed like that for hours, until the light shifted, until Irene knocked on the shed door, worried I wandered off somewhere. I told her I was fine. We both knew that wasn't true. That weekend, I packed away his clothes, didn't donate them, just boxed them up, labeled the box, Thomas. That was enough. I started talking to him, out loud, in the mornings, at night, when I saw something funny on TV, like he was just in the next room. It wasn't crazy, it was survival. One night, I was fixing the front steps. He used to nag me about it, said one of us would break a hip if we didn't patch him up. So I finally did. Hammer in one hand, his voice in my head. And when I finished, I said, "There, happy now?" And I swear, just for a second, I heard him laugh. Grief is strange like that. Sometimes it feels like punishment. Other times it's the last thread tying you to someone you loved. I went back to church, not because I had questions, but because it was the only place I could sit still without anyone asking why. Irene came with me a few times. We'd light a candle, say a prayer, and leave before the final hymn. No small talk, no explanations, just presence. Fall came, then snow. I shoveled the drive like Thomas used to, cursed at the wind like he did, fed the fire like he taught me. The routine stayed, even when he didn't. I kept a journal, not daily, just when it felt too heavy to carry alone. Wrote things like, Thomas would have hated this soup. Saw a crow today, thought of him. Still not used to the quiet. One entry just said, I miss being someone's little brother. That line hit me harder than any of the others, because it was true. When Thomas died, I didn't just lose a brother. I lost my role in the world. I started visiting his grave once a week. It's simple, a flat stone, his name, the years, no quote. He wouldn't have wanted one. Sometimes I brought flowers. Sometimes just sat in the truck, watching the tree nearby bend with the wind. I talked to him there too. Told him about the mail, about politics, about nothing. It helped, even if he didn't answer. After a while, I stopped waiting for signs, stopped checking the clock at 11:11, stopped reading into dreams. It wasn't that I stopped believing. It's that I realized some love doesn't need to be loud. It just is. One night, I walked into the kitchen, found a moth circling the light. Thomas hated moths, said they were ghosts in disguise. I laughed and left the back door open just in case it wanted out. I waited almost a year before I stepped foot on it, the land Thomas left me. 40 acres, pine, ash, and wild grass. No house, just the bones of an old barn and a creek that only runs when it wants to. I'd pass it sometimes, driving into town. Wouldn't stop, wouldn't even look, because I didn't want to admit it scared me. It wasn't the land itself, it was what it meant. Owning it meant accepting he was gone, and accepting that I was next. Not today, not this year, but soon enough. Irene asked me about it one night over coffee. She said, "Why don't you go out there, maybe plant something?" I said I wasn't ready. She didn't push, just nodded, the way she does when she knows a storm's coming and there's nothing left to do but wait it out. One morning in early spring, I woke up, put on my boots, and drove. Didn't tell anyone, didn't plan, just drove. The gate was still rusted shut. Thomas never fixed it. He said a gate that squeaks keeps honest people honest. I climbed over. Felt like a trespasser on my own inheritance. The air smelled like thawed dirt and promise. The creek was running. First time I'd seen it flow in years. I followed it, all the way to the sycamore tree we carved our names into when we were kids. T and H. Still there, still crooked. I sat down under that tree and just listened. No phone, no plan, just me and the ghosts. It hit me then, how little I'd actually lived. I'd been loyal, I'd been present, but I'd never really chosen anything, not fully. Not the town, not the job,
Not even the women I almost married. I was always waiting for someone else to decide, for Thomas to lead, for the world to tell me who I was. That land didn't just belong to me. It was the first thing in my life that waited for me to choose it. And I finally did. I came back the next day. And the next. Started clearing brush, fixing the barn roof, letting the silence settle. I planted 2 trees, one for Thomas and one for me, side by side like we used to be. People in town started asking questions. You building something? You moving out there? I just smiled and said, not yet, because for the first time, I wasn't in a rush. I brought a chair out there, an old folding one, sat by the creek, started writing again. Nothing big, just thoughts. Like, maybe land is memory made solid. Maybe grief is the tax on love. Maybe I'm not lost, just resting. I found a rock one day, flat, round, perfect. Painted Thomas's initials on it, set it by the tree I planted for him. Not a gravestone, not a shrine, just a marker to say he was here. Spring turned to summer. I built a fence, painted it white, though I knew it wouldn't stay that way. Clean things never last long out here. But I didn't mind. I liked the work, liked the sweat, liked watching something appear where there once been nothing. That land didn't heal me, but it gave me a place to be broken in peace, and that was enough. I remember the first night I stayed out there. I brought a sleeping bag, a flashlight, and a can of soup. The stars were loud, the wind louder, and I slept better than I had in months. I dreamed of Thomas, not sick, not angry, just building a fire, whistling some old tune. When I woke up, I was smiling. Irene visits sometimes. She brings tea, sits in the folding chair, says things like, "You know, Thomas would have hated that paint color." And I say, "Good, he's not the boss of me anymore." She laughs. We don't talk much about grief, but we talk around it, and sometimes that's enough. The town's changed too. People grow older, stores close, kids leave, but the land stays. It watches, it holds. And I think maybe that's the lesson Thomas never said out loud. You don't get to choose what happens, but you do get to choose what you carry. I carry him. Not every second, not every breath, but in the way I mend things, in the way I watch the sky, in the way I listen, even when no one's speaking. They asked me last month if I ever sell the land. Said some developer wanted to build a retreat center. Offered good money. I said no. Not because I'm sentimental, but because it's mine. For the first time, something is mine, and I'm not ready to let go. One of these days, I might build a little cabin, Just a place to read, to rest, to keep warm in winter. Or maybe I'll leave it wild. Let the trees decide. But I know this, when it's my time, when they scatter my ashes or bury me or whatever they choose, I want it to be here, by the tree with the rock, by the creek that only runs when it wants to, on the land I never claimed, but finally called home.
You know, I used to think forgiveness was something you give to someone who deserves it. But I've come to learn it's something you give to yourself when you're tired of carrying things that never get lighter. My brother and I, we fought, we broke, we hurt each other in ways we never admitted out loud. But in the end, what mattered wasn't who was right, it was who stayed, who came back. Sometimes healing doesn't look like big reunions or grand speeches. Sometimes it's a quiet afternoon on old land, a hand reaching out when you least expect it, a chair left empty but no longer bitter. We fought over land, but he gave me something bigger, a reason to let go, a reason to come home. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let the pain write the rest of your story.